Hello, I'm Dane. Welcome to another episode of Dax Jusu. In today's episode, we'll discuss something that's probably been bothering you, and that is whether it is possible to always select the latest date in the slicer. So let's start by creating a calendar table in Dax. And I'll call this table dates. The dates, and I'll start with my start date, which is, let's say, the start of this year. And I'll add today's date equals today. And if in case I decide later to have a different end date, then I'll create an end date variable, which is equivalent to today. And I'll now create our table. So I'll be using calendar function, have a start date, and we have our end. Oops, I forgot to return our dates table. And I like changing the format to something that is more international, or let's say easier to understand. So YYY MMM DD. And let's add our dates table here. And let's change the auto size behavior to fit the content. I honestly don't like this go to fit behavior by default. Okay. And now let's add our calendar table, or I mean our visual, or a slicer. And I'll change this to vertical. Okay. So here's what people would normally do. They will create a column that will tell whether a specific date is today's date. So let's, for example, let's name this date table date two, and the formula is if date is equal to today, then today. Else, we format dates or date as YYYYYYYMMMDD. So this creates a calculated table with today's date as it is sending today, and then use that in the slicer. Now this will work, but for some people, they really want to select the actual date, not the word today. Let's sort this. Yeah, it's now in descending order. So this is not what we want. Okay. Here's another approach that other users have tried, and that is, let me sort this axis to descending, and then select this. View bookmark. So Some users have created a bookmark and then bookmark this date. Okay, so this is supposed to be today's date. What if today's date has changed? Let's go back to our calendar table and change the end date. And let's assume end date is now, let's assume today's date is today plus one. Or let's, today plus one. So today's date have changed to November 30, although today is still November 29th. And as you can see, it still selects November 29th. So I'll select this and then I'll activate bookmark. So it still selects November 29th, which means that the bookmark approach doesn't work. So what do we do? So let's go back to our calendar table and let's add one more column and we'll call this offset column. So our offset will be difference between today, or let's say the current date, or whatever the date is in our table, and then today, and the difference is day. Oops. Supposed to be day, not data table, so day. So this will create some numbers. So descending, or ascending rather. So November 29 today, our offset value is 0. Now, um, in Power BI, the slicer selection can be controlled by the group by property of a column. And we can access that group by property using Tabular Editor. So let's go to Tabular Editor, External Tools, and click Tabular Editor. Let's say, where is Tabular Editor? So Tabular Editor again. Still waiting for that. Okay, not this one. Tabular Editor. So here's Tabular Editor. So what we need to do is look for that column, which is our date column, and look for that column property, which is, let me zoom out a bit, group by column properties. I've found it. And we change the group by column to another column, which is, oops, our offset column, offset. Okay. Okay, save the changes. And oh, let me close this. And let's wait for the changes to be saved. I'll duplicate this, clear this, remove this, and I'll add the offset value. And I don't need to sum the offset value. And let's sort this in descending order. Right. Well, here's what's going to happen. Since the group by property of our date table has been changed to offset value, when we select something, for example, November 29th, DAX remembers the offset value to be 0. So the next time our date shifts, it will still remember 0. So it will still select 0, but the date changes. So let's try changing our calendar. And let's make our today's date to tomorrow 1. Now, as you can see, it's selected November 30 because that's tomorrow's date. So one more try. This time I'll select November 27 just for the sake of illustration. And if I add one more date to this calendar table, it should select November 28 automatically. So now, see, it's selected November 28 automatically. And let's go back to actual date. Okay, so that worked, right? There are things though that this might not work for. Let me change this date to let me just duplicate it instead. Remove this and change this to drop down. Lighter setting changes to drop down. And let's select November 28. Okay. And let's change our calendar table again. So let's add one more date. So we've selected November 20. Now, November 29 has the offset value of 1. Previously, it was November 20. However, in our drop-down slicer, it still uses or it still selects November 28. So this is one of the limitations of drop-down slicer. But if you select this drop down or down arrow, it should automatically select November 29. That's it. It's just that it doesn't change the selection visually until you have actually selected or click this drop down option. And one more thing, this will not work with range slider. So let's say before and so currently, let me clear this and I'll change this to 10, 22, 11, 14, or 11, yes, 11, 14. So I want to change the offset value to something else. So for today's date to a different date. So if I add 5, I would expect this date to change. But as you can see, oops, no, this will be turn an error. Oh, did not return an error, thankfully. So I've changed it to 10, but the selection still did not change. And let's have a look at the table. So the table still do not change. So the bottom line is you can dynamically change the slicer selection to a specific date and make that date appear in the slicer, but there are limitations depending on the slicer you want to use. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you for staying with me and have a good one. Bye bye.